Hi there, so today I'm going to be knocking out two things. I'm going to be using the new Sandrin Gaiuto. This is the Tungsten Carbide that Sandrin uses. It's a sheet of it cut into a chef's knife, or a Gaiuto knife. I don't know my chef's knives. So I'm going to be using this to cook a meal, and the meal I'm going to cook is from it's a thing called HelloFresh, and I'm going to preface this by saying, preface? I'm going to start by saying this isn't sponsored by HelloFresh, which is probably the first actual multimedia thing made that wasn't like a sponsored video. I don't know. It's like if you listen to podcasts, you'll hear HelloFresh, Dollar Shave Club, Hims.com. There's a few things that are like the big sponsors, and HelloFresh is one of them. So we listen to a lot of podcasts, and we're quite busy people. So we were open to new ways of getting good food into us. We always find that the shopping part of it is the worst part about cooking from raw ingredients. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be cooking the HelloFresh Shepherd's Pie. And it's really simple. It comes with 5 meals, gets delivered on a Saturday, comes in a cooled pack. Not a super like, some of them come in a big foam box, some of these kind of meal things, big foam box of dry ice. This is just a cooled pack, so you wouldn't want to leave it out there all day. So make sure you know what day you're getting it and be there, is the advice I'll give you. Anyway, I digress. You get one of these for each meal of the 5 meals that we get a week. It has an ingredients list. Most of the things come with the packet box thing, and they're all kind of in color-coded bags, really easy to figure out which one's which. And then some of the things are relatively mundane things that it assumes you have. I'll talk more about that later. But anyway, we're going to go through the steps of making shepherd's pie. So overall, we found that the food is really good. It's about the same price, I would say, as if you bought everything. So that's good, because what usually happens with us when we get the rare spark of up and go to go and make something from raw ingredients, you go to the shops, you'll forget what you've got, so you'll buy extra, you'll end up with doubles of some things, you'll end up forgetting something, having to go back. When you go back, you do that extra couple of buys. So it seems to be a pretty good fit for us. We're relatively busy, but we've still got 45 minutes in the evening to make a meal. That's fine. It's just the preparation during the day, the going back and forth, is something I'm really happy to be without. I would love it if they gave absolutely everything in with the packets, because they sometimes exclude things like oil or things like butter. Just put the little butters in there, dudes. That's what I would say. Apart from water, obviously, I can get that from the tap. Even us millennials know that. Everything else should just be in it, I think. That's the only criticism I've got, really. But overall, it's a really good way. If you never really learned to cook from raw stuff, like with me, I've always just you buy things that are kind of partially done, you combine them. It's like food's more like combinations and heating up rather than actually preparing things. So if you never learned that skill or you're a bit rusty on it, it's a really great way to get into it. It's good to just see, especially with little kids, which we've got. Often they're really like, you put something strange in front of them and they're like, to them it's just like a big pile of shit. But when you cook with them and show them that these things all started off as relatively innocuous beans, carrots, spices, and they see that whole process, they're less like apprehensive of it once it's in front of them. So that's another really good thing we've noticed about it as well. But now onto the knife review, because that's probably what you're mainly here for. Alrighty, so for the knife review portion, just up in the knife lab where I feel it's most appropriate, I'm going to talk about, largely this review is going to be focused on the performance of the blade. I'm not a culinary expert, so I can't really comment on how handles are supposed to work for like long-term chef applications. I guess I'll touch on it briefly. The handle for me was fine. There is something of a channel along here which allows you to sort of hold the knife like this if you're doing rock style cuts. Otherwise it is quite neutral, a little bit on the blocky side, but again, that may be 100% purpose driven. I try not to talk like as an expert about things that I'm not an expert in. I'm not an expert in cooking, chef's knife, anything like that. What I do feel I have some knowledge in is blade performance and things like that. So I'll get into this right now. The big deal about this knife is that it is made out of tungsten carbide, and it's Sandrin's tungsten carbide. What is unique about this is that traditionally tungsten carbide, it has been used in blades, but often in smaller utility style blades and often even replaceable disposable blades. It's always a really long edge retaining substance, and it's always quite hard. What Sandrin have done is they've got a specific matrix they put it in, which I believe is a cobalt matrix, which allows the blade to have some flexibility. So it's not a brittle, shatterable sort of blade. Tungsten carbide can often feel and behave a bit more like a ceramic style material than a steel style material. However, in this they've sort of taken a leaf from kind of both books, I suppose, and have got a flexible material which does still keep a lot of tungsten's really high edge retaining and high wear resistance qualities. So if you want to document this properly, and you want to see like in action the Sandrin tungsten carbide working, you can watch a video I did a fair while ago now where I tested the TCK, which is their pocket knife, which I have a new version of it here actually. I tested the TCK against my rope cutting test, which I do on this channel, where I cut a whole bunch of twisted sisal rope until the knife no longer makes a cut into paper like that. And it's the longest lasting edge I've ever had is on this stuff here. I managed to match it with one type of steel, which was called Rex 121, which is a highly exotic, very difficult to work with, very expensive steel. And I could match the result. Frustratingly, I was hoping to actually pass it, but I matched it. And I think it was about 1,500 times through the twisted sisal rope. Now, just to put into perspective, really good pocket knife steels, like really good ones, often do that test and do to about 700 or 800 cuts. And just your standard pocket knives, sort of something that you might spend $50 on in a shop, they generally about 150 to 200. Talking really generally here, but the material will hold an edge for such a long time, and especially in a kitchen knife application where you're generally going to be using it in soft goods. I doubt you'd have to do much sharpening on this in its lifetime. So the edge retention of this knife is really the selling point. The material is very exotic, and there's going to be some learning curves to take when you choose to buy a chef's knife in this stuff. So moving on to another attribute of steel, or blade material, I guess now we're talking, rust resistance, tarnish resistance, stain resistance. Now, nickel bonded tungsten carbide, so where you use like a nickel background, that is generally a chemically inert substance, so that won't react with much at all. If you read up about tungsten carbide rings, nickel blend tungsten carbide rings simply won't tarnish. They will basically be ageless. This is cobalt. This is a cobalt matrix, so this will react. So cobalt's somewhat reactive. So to test this, I have basically used the knife just like a shitty knife user, like someone who's, and because basically that's what I am. Like in terms of my kitchen knives, I don't pull any punches about that. I don't know this stuff like the back of my hand, and I don't kind of treasure or baby my kitchen knives at all. I'm not a professional chef. I'm sure if you are, you do, but I don't. So we're not going to put our knives through the dishwasher, which is a massive no-no because it's basically just a chaotic environment in there that anything can happen pretty much. But yeah, we're known to put our knives through the dishwasher. We're known to cut things up, get distracted by the kids, and leave it sitting on a bench covered in some sort of residue of whatever we were cutting. We're known to do that as well. So I've had it for a couple of weeks and I've done all that to it, and I've actually purposefully stressed it a little bit more. So I put my, first thing I did was I put it in the dishwasher and I left it there for a day, and I left it there lying down, so flat. So beads on the front, beads on the back. That did reduce the finish. There was tarnishing on the surface of the tungsten carbide. It is a rust. It looks a little bit like rust, but it's probably a different reaction. But it's certainly an oxidization of some sort from the droplets of the water. So for sure, it's not a rust or a tarnish proof material at all. What did happen after all that, and it's still, even now, still the sharpest kitchen knife I've got by far, just laser sharp still. So regardless of that, it's still got a immaculate edge. So there's that too, but yes, this will tarnish and rust just a little bit, as well as the water thing. I've just done orange cutting, citric cutting, cutting of raw meat, all that sort of stuff that can generally form a patina on, say, it'll form a really strong patina on a carbon steel knife, and even somewhat of a patina on some stainless steel knives. And yeah, it's done the same here. So I would say in terms of rust resistance, it's about on par with a good stainless steel blade. And if you don't abuse it, you probably won't have any problems at all. Like if you do follow the code of kitchen knife use, for sure, you will be fine. But just for me, I did do testing because this is a bit of a review channel. And yeah, it will tarnish if you push it to tarnish, or if you forget about it or neglect it. So there you go. The way the blade performs is interesting. I'll show some shots now, but you'll see that this is a remarkably thin blade. And it is thin because, I believe, for two reasons. One is probably a bit of more of a boring reason. I would say that they get sheets of tungsten carbide in this thickness. I notice it's about the same thickness as the TCK. I think it is the same thickness as the TCK folding knife, the pocket knife. So I would guess that they get sheets of it like this, and they remove with probably like a diamond wheel or something like that to get the blade profiles cut. And so as such, what you basically have is, although it's a very thin blade, there is no tapering from the spine to the edge. There is a rather sudden edge that is ground on at the end of a very thin piece of TC. So comparatively, say my Spyderco kitchen knife here, which is probably my favorite kitchen knife, this has a bit of a thicker spine than the Sandrin, but it's a gradual diagonal line coming down to the edge. And to assist, I'm going to actually draw a bit of a diagram because I want it to be clear, so let's do that. So the Spyderco kitchen knife, so this is the spine here, where you're looking at it from the front, as in from this way. There are just two diagonal lines. I'll try and draw them as straight as I can. There we go. There we go. Two diagonal gradual lines reaching an eventual tip, which is then got somewhat of a micro bevel. So if you magnify that, it looks a bit like this. And then a bit of a micro bevel. It's obviously not to scale. So that's how the Spyderco works. And most kitchen knives, in fact. In fact, some kitchen knives are even chisel grind, which means that this one of these lines here is completely like a complete right angle, and then the blade comes away like that. Those are probably your real sort of pro kitchen knives, a bit more like that. But this here, the benefit of this is that material, once the initial break in the surface is made, the wedge-like angles here do a lot of the pushing aside of the materials, and you'll find that even unless it's a particularly sticky, goopy substance, it'll do a downward push cut a lot easier than the Sandrin will, because the Sandrin is a bit like this. So again, not to scale, the Sandrin is basically two straight parallel lines of material, much thinner though, but still straight lines of material, and then the edge is a bit of a hollow, and then it's a micro bevel. So just to inflate that a little bit, so here, we'll draw it in this circle here. So the edge, once these two straight lines have terminated, is a hollow, all right, which is good, like the scoops do. The scoops here do really good in terms of sinking into material, and then just a tiny little micro bevel like that. So that's like a blown up version of what the Sandrin's edge is like. So, makes really precise cuts at the absolute edge, and even though it is still a very, very thin knife, you'll still notice material will stick to the sides of this just a little bit easier, simply due to there isn't really any tapering that's pushing it apart. When I test it knife to knife with the other blades, the thinness does it a huge amount of favors there, so I think that is also why the stock is so thin. So cutting cheese and things like that is still pleasant enough, but most things you're going to find just a little bit less resistance when you use a more traditional sort of tapered kitchen knife pattern. However, why isn't Sandrin doing this with this? I would say cost is a massive thing. So it's a relatively new material, right? It's Sandrin make more traditional sort of fixed blade knives with it, and then they make the TCK with it. The TCK was the first knife they could really sell for much under $1,000. It's a really expensive material. These sell for about 200 euros or something like that, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And this is about a 260 euro kitchen knife. I would suggest that if they got a thicker sheet of TC and did stock removal on it with what I imagine are very expensive abrasives, I would say that would push the cost up tenfold almost. Just the sheer amount of removal of material, machining costs, things like that. So I think this is the way they can do this project with just sheet stock that's probably just set for them in a huge, en masse. And I would say that's the way they can do this in such an affordable manner. And that, I think, affordability does probably translate to another issue with the knife. Well, not an issue, but I guess something you need to know is that this one here doesn't have a particular tip on it. Now, I've looked up Gyuto patterns before, and some of them have tips, some of them don't, so it may be intentional. But I could also imagine that the way they cut this edge in and just generally shape the blade, I could definitely see that they're probably using maybe round abrasive wheels or something similar. Maybe they're using diamond wire, I'm not sure, but definitely to put the edge on, they seem like they're using an abrasive wheel such as like a Tormek, probably a larger scale than that, but an abrasive wheel such as that, and I would say that that's very difficult. And I know from when I do Tormek sharpening, it is quite difficult to maintain a laser sort of needle style point. So I think that's what's going on there as well. So just a couple of things, I guess, that you're maybe giving up in order to have the supreme edge retention that this thing offers. So other property of the blade is that it is magnetic, so it will stick to your wall mounted knife blocks, all that sort of stuff. And from what I can tell, I did a lot of reading on TC and food safety and TC and exposure and things like that. And like most materials, as long as you don't grind it up into a powder and snort it, you're generally fine. I couldn't find a decisive article saying that it's bad. I could find a lot of articles saying that it is just like any other material. Like there is no added risk to using this in food prep than anything else. By all means, if you can find an actual article that's peer-reviewed, then by all means put it below. This is a pioneering substance. It's a new substance. So you know what? I don't have a horse in this race, so I'm very open to reading all about how it looks and how it goes on a longer term, for sure. But yeah, from what I can read right now, there isn't any leaching of it really. There isn't any radiation or anything. There's nothing too funky going on with it. It's just a different type of metal. So there you have it. So in terms of like a little asterisk at the bottom, I guess from what I can see, it's food safe and it's fine. But by all means, if you see otherwise, just put a source and I'm more than happy to read it because, hey, I'm using this in my kitchen too, so I want to know, you know. But anyway, that's the general overall, I guess, summing up of how the blade performs. It's an interesting kitchen knife. If you collect kitchen knives, I would say definitely give this a try. Like if you're just interested in testing performance. In my experience, this knife cuts best in this sort of motion rather than in this sort of motion. But of course the rocking cuts against smaller veggies and cutting up celery, things like that, dicing up onions is absolutely fine because you only are using a small amount of the edge. When you're cutting things up like whole onions, stuff like that, you do find a little bit of extra stick that you may notice between using like a more standard kitchen knife and this knife. But to me, it's not remarkable. I was interested to see the tarnishing of the surfaces. I didn't know whether it was going to be a stainless or a stain proof or just a tarnishing substance, so that was cool as well to see that. Now I've done it, you don't have to. And yeah, overall I would say it's pretty cool. Value for money wise, you know what, you see kitchen knives in VG10 for about the same price sometimes from more prestigious kitchen knife companies. That being said, they're probably ground for use by experts and by proper enthusiasts. This is a knife made by the material enthusiasts who are really keen on this material. So I don't know what the background is of the designers, but I think this is more an exercise in tungsten carbide enjoyment rather than kitchen knife enjoyment. So if that makes sense and that's something that you kind of appreciate as well, then definitely give it a try. But otherwise, it's certainly a functional, usable, good kitchen knife that has found a home with me for sure. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye now.